Hey guys, and welcome to Faewood. So this is the next part of my necklace. Now I'll be beading the top half of the necklace, and if you remember from the designs, this part is really representative of the mystics. So what I wanted to do was to try and somehow incorporate the colours of the mystics. So you can see it's actually a silver line, this one, but it's a frosted silver line. And I was going to go around each of the cabochons with it, but you can see I pulled that out before, and I just wanted to really make these pop. So I wanted to go around them with a different colour and decided on this oxblood. It's just like an opaque oxblood colour. I thought it worked in really well with the other colours. I looked a lot at the illustrations and the different artwork and things to do with all of the mystics as well as the dark crystal in general, and it's very earthy tones. So I really tried to keep very, very earthy tones in this. Some of the metallics I've used I feel work really well with those earthy tones as well, but I didn't want anything that was like pure silver lined, for example, that would stand out way too much. So that's why I went for the frosted. But yeah, this oxblood, I think it just helps to make those planet shapes really pop and accentuate the circle around each of them. And you can see that some of the cabochons, as I mentioned in an earlier video, I think, are larger than the overall sort of shape of the necklace. And I did that on purpose. But what I wanted to do was to keep that outline of the necklace itself in the metallic beads, and then have the planet circle piercing that, and use these oxbloods around that. So I didn't want the parts that that stick out, I didn't want to edge those again in the metallic beads. I just wanted that oxblood to really pierce that line. I just think it gives an interesting look to it, rather than have anything that is on the very outer edge of the necklace be surrounded by the metallic beads. I've just really kept the line of the original necklace, and then accentuated the fact that these are sticking out of aspects of that necklace. I hope that's making sense. I was really hard to explain my what I'm meaning for that. Now I did start filling in little bits and pieces around the crystal, and you can see those brass Celtic knots there. I actually used a triangle bead in the middle of these, and it's again a frosted metallic, and I really liked the look of it. It has, because of the shape of it, you can see the ridge that the triangle forms between each of these little squares of the brass Celtic knot, and I really wanted to make sure they stayed the same on both sides. So I kept those lines of the triangle pointed in the same direction on both sides of the necklace, so that it really did look even. So just be careful if you are doing something like that. Because of those ridges, you'll notice it will look different if you don't have them beaded in the same direction. Now this part was tricky. So for the mystics, they have a lot of very swirly imagery. a great deal of the imagery that was drawn for them was very symbolic looking, and it was very organic, but it had mainly these swirls. So this is where those Silverline frosted, I think they were rosaline colour, and then I used a size 15 topaz, gold line topaz as the contrasting, because again it had that earthy tone. So the Mystics have a lot of very light colours, but not white. They're usually like, it seems to be sort of a sand colour, a very natural organic colour, like sandstone or something. So I was really trying to find a colour that I felt worked well for that. I did have a look at some colour lined things and opaque beads, but I felt like the opaque ones, they were too bold. So they didn't sort of have that softness that I was trying to get, and these Silverline ones I thought worked better. Now you can see here I'm putting some more of those Swarovski purple pearls that I used in earlier parts of the necklace. It's both for design factors, and also some of these elements, it just adds an anchor so that it's really strong and those parts will stay nice and secure to the necklace. So the tricky part of doing these swirls was I wanted to make sure there was no backing showing. I wanted it to be really tight and, a really tight swirl, and both those beads just really next to each other very smoothly. So to try and do that, I had to start out with these size 15s and bead sort of almost a little comma shape, so that I had something to edge my size 11s around a little bit further, and really just slowly build each line up so it had something to sit against. So when I did those initial size 15s, I had to really think about how much room I needed for the size 11s to sit inside of that. And I just slowly built up the curl, moving between the two colours as I needed to, so that I could bead a section against the previous bit of beadwork. I hope this is making sense. It's quite a complicated thing to explain, but watch the way I do it, creating first that little comma shape with the size 15s, and then going in with the size 11s and beading around the edge of that comma as much as I could before I then needed to go back into the size 15s and bead that around the size 11s, and so forth until I build it out and out and out. So I put the swirls anywhere where I had a little bit of room to at least get a little bit of a swirl happening. And then I filled in the rest of the sections, sometimes alternating the two colours again, as if the swirl was sort of continuing behind the other elements of the necklace, and then other times I just switched to purely filling it in with the size 11s. It's just so that there wasn't too much busyness. Again, I'm conscious of the fact that there's a lot of elements to this necklace, and I do sometimes have a tendency to go a bit overboard, so I do try and really think about keeping some consistency with certain elements so that it just binds the design together. So again, you can see I'm building up one layer at a time, starting with that little comma of size 15s, but leaving enough gap for the size 11s and beading very tightly in against the other beads before having to go back to the size 15s and continue on. Now, if you needed to, you could potentially draw yourself some guidelines on here if you were struggling to bead this freehand, you know, without any guide marks. I found I was fine once I worked out how I wanted to do it. The technique worked for me. I didn't need any guidelines sort of drawn in. But that's another way that you could do it, would be just to draw a swirl shape and bead around that, and see if making sure to think about how much room you need for the beads that you're using, and especially so if you want the beadwork to be very tight, you need to be quite precise with that shape. So it might be a bit of trial and error, but that's, yeah, something you could definitely do. And I sometimes will do that if I'm having a bit of trouble, is to just draw some little guidelines in, either with a fabric pencil, or sometimes I'll even use like a marker or something, like, or a pen, if I'm beading over it and you won't really see it, you know. So I would use like a black pen perhaps on this so that you wouldn't see it too much, and I'll be beading over it anyway. So this whole top half of the necklace is representative of the mystics. So if you remember, we did the Skeksis down the bottom, and this part is the mystics, as well as having the planets for Augra's observatory. So in no way was I trying to be symmetrical for these swirls, and there would be no way to do that anyway, because the other cabochons and things, some of them are placed randomly. As you know, if you watched the other videos, I mentioned the fact that I was purposely putting these randomly and sort of organically, because it wouldn't really look like planets or an observatory if you had this be symmetrical, so it just really wouldn't work. But I did keep the dichroic elements symmetrical, just so that it had, your eye had something to settle on, I guess. And then these aspects are uniform in their design, but not at all symmetrical. Now, I could have put other symbology here of the mystics, but I do have already those Celtic knot shapes and a couple of other metal shapes that had things that sort of looked to me a bit like some of the mystics symbology. And I really didn't want this to be too crowded or too have too many elements to it. So I thought the swirls were a good way to keep it more simplified, while still having something that you could sort of identify with being the mystics. So this video is actually about 12 hours worth of beadwork. This is quite a bit of surface area to bead, and it does take time. You can see the parts where I'm filling it out, they're just in line with the circles, so I continue just building out and out and out from that so that those lines are just in this lovely flowing pattern in sync with those curled circular shapes. And as I would always recommend, have a think about the thread colour that you use. I've been happy enough to go with a black for this one. I could have potentially gone with a brown or a tan colour. Black seemed fine. You couldn't see the stitches because I've got that nice black dyed stiff stuff underneath. I wouldn't go white. White stitching would stand out a lot. And I remember when I first started beadwork, I often used undyed stiff stuff and didn't think about the stitch colour, the thread colour, and so often I regretted that afterwards, and sometimes even tried to colour it in with texture through the beadwork and things like that because I realised how much you could see it. So for the work that you're putting in, it's worth thinking about those things. So that's the main part of the beadwork done now. So I hope you guys are enjoying this series. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you keep up to date with all the things I'm up to. I've got plenty more videos of this and the costume to come, as well as all sorts of other things that I'll be sharing along the way. Thanks for visiting Faewood, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.